Hi, thanks so much guys for joining and thanks especially for everybody at Miami for organizing. It feels like they're always at the front of any new developments from Miami Rookie Camp to webinars and now to COVID, so we'll see what's next. The paper is co-authored with Andrea and Chris and it was a pleasure to work on this paper. And it was great to have Miami deadline because it definitely gave us a good incentive to have the paper very timely. So the topic is strategic syndication is bad news shared in loan syndicates. And let me hope I see. All right, so what we do in this paper, we pretty much go back to the very core of that contracting literature or syndicated loan market literature, and we carefully look at the information asymmetry in syndicated loans. So information asymmetry in syndicated loans is one of the primary issues in this market. There's generally information asymmetry always, right, between the company and the lenders because managers know more than the outside lenders. However, this issue is even more complicated in a syndicated loan market because there are a number of lenders here or different types of lenders in a syndicate, and they have very different access to private information. So two primary types of lenders in a syndicate. The first one is the lead arranger. This is the main bank that organizes the syndicate, initiates a relationship with the borrower, negotiates the loan contracts, performs most of the screening and monitoring of the borrower, and as a result has access to a lot of private information and very good channels of direct communications with the company. On the other side, we have participants. These are the banks or institutional investors that join the syndicate, and they primarily fund most of the loan, usually from around 85 to 80% of the loan. However, they do not have direct access, and they usually don't communicate with the borrower and primarily have like arm's length relationship with the company. As a result, of course, there's information asymmetry between the lead bank and participants, and this information asymmetry leads to typical adverse selection and moral hazard problem because lead arranger chooses or screens the borrower and also monitors as exposed, and monitoring efforts are unobservable in this setting. How a market deals with that, or how syndicates work, how this information asymmetry is mitigated. Participants require lead arranger to keep skin in the game or retain portion of the loan, and this portion of the loan is typically higher if there's higher credit risk or higher information asymmetry about the company. So what we ask in this paper, we ask pretty simple question that wasn't surprisingly not addressed by prior literature, and we're asking, is it possible that lead arrangers opportunistically withhold some private information from participants, and how does that affect the structure of the syndicate? So there are a lot of prior papers I'll touch based on some of them. We discussed some of them in the paper that talk about lead arranger share and how information asymmetry is resolved, but there are very few papers that address if that is done successfully, right? If lead arranger indeed performs well, if lead arranger do a good job in screening and monitoring the borrowers on behalf of syndicate participants. Generally, it's a very interesting question, and I think it was hard to address, and this is probably explained why it wasn't really addressed by prior literature, because it's very hard to capture private information. We can observe exchange between borrowers and lead arrangers. We don't know what communication is there. We don't know what private information lead arranger was able to uncover during the due diligence process. So how have we overcome this difficulty? We are looking at the setting of FDA inspections. And this setting is unique and probably provides us with unique opportunity to capture, or at least proxy for private information that lead arrangers likely to have. FDA inspections, you would, I think, expect them to be publicly available and reported by the firm, and it was at least surprising to me they are not. There is no requirement for a firm to report FDA investigation, and you probably saw a few recent studies In similar areas, there is no requirement for firms to disclose SEC investigations as well. As a result, however, we believe that lead arrangers, through the due diligence process, will uncover some information about the inspections. They are sophisticated players in this market, and they're likely to have information about FDA inspections that the firm had recently. However, participants may not have access to this information unless the arranger informs them directly, because firms often don't disclose this information. Another good features of the setting that we believe help us to address this information, this question, is that FDA inspections are typically not predictable. They don't have advance notice, or they don't give advance notice to firms about the inspection. They are not regularly scheduled. It's not like earnings announcement that or financial statements that come on a regular basis. They're performed by the Office of Regulatory Affairs, which is generally independent within FDA. So if you're concerned, or we were concerned that maybe inspections are correlated with some future drugs approvals, which by themselves may affect syndicate structure, it's not the case. They are absolutely independent in their inspections. And it's also good that firms cannot control and have absolutely no influence over FDA inspections. And they are not, FDA people are not hired or compensated by the firm. They cannot be affected. Firms cannot affect any outcomes of FDA inspections. So they're very different in that respect from auditors. Whenever FDA personnel, they are done with the inspection after when inspection finishes, there's a meeting with the managers. And in case FDA people found any deficiencies or violations, they issue Form 483 to the firm, which is, you'll probably saw in the paper, is equivalent to the bad outcome. So they indicate that firm violated some of the regulations, and its product or processes or devices are not safe to us as the public. It's pretty important event for the firm. It had very serious consequences. It may affect future profitability because they may not be, it's a bad signal, and firms may not get future drug approvals if they have bad inspections. There are a lot of costs associated with Form 483. Firms need to change some processes, some internal controls, may hire external consultants to help them to deal with that. They may also need to have substantial capital investments or capital expenditures to fix it. And they have to correct violations within 15 days. They have to report to FDA how they are going to fix the violations, and they have to show good progress within the next year. Otherwise, there will be much more serious sanctions from FDA. Just if you are not convinced yet that this is important, my husband is working in clinical research for many years, and when I casually mentioned to him that I started working on something related to FDA, he immediately said, "Do you know what Form 483 is?" And he said, "This is an absolute worst nightmare for any company, any clinical research person." He had, unfortunately, a few times. And he said, this is what everybody is concerned about. To give you a little bit more anecdotal evidence what this Form 483 can indicate, for example, we have Pfizer from 2012. Pfizer got a report from a physician that the patient received incorrect dose of the drug, and according to the physician, it caused the death of the patient. And physician claims this was because the drug wasn't labeled correctly, the dosage wasn't labeled correctly. And FDA inspection discovered that Pfizer didn't follow up sufficiently on these issues. And this is, of course, hazard for the public and for people who take the drugs. Another example is Church and Dwight, and for them, the situation is different, maybe not as severe, but they have some laboratory issues, and the FDA inspections uncovered that they don't have a good procedures or good internal controls to follow up on all these investigations. And something, even if you're healthy and you're not taking any medication, this is the example for you. We have, hopefully you see it, we have Kraft Foods, and they have some issues with their production. At least ketchup is really popular with my kids. And what we see here is that there's a metal beam located just above the tank with the ketchup product, and it's not done well because the beam is rusted and peeling paint, and that is all falls into the ketchup that eventually ends up on our tables, or at least on our kids' tables. And this is what FDA didn't like. So going back to our setting, what are the incentives? So I'm just trying to make sure you all see my slides. Sorry. In our setting, what are the incentives of the lead arranger? Disclose this bad information if they uncover that. And it's typical disclosure setting in case participants know that lead arranger has the information, we can end up with full disclosure equilibrium, because if lead arranger doesn't disclose, participants would presume the worst case scenario for the firm, and the lead arranger is forced to disclose. However, they're most likely to be non-full revealing equilibrium, because participants may not know if there was an inspection and the outcomes of the inspections. First of all, it's hard to predict the inspections. Participants don't observe private information between lead arranger and the borrower. And even if they would like to independently try to use FOIA request and Freedom of Information Act request and obtain information about the inspections, it usually takes 2 years to get back information from FDA, so they cannot get it in a timely manner. As a result, participants don't know, if they don't observe disclosure, if there is no inspection, lead arranger is uninformed, lead arranger withhold bad news, or they just may not be aware of the importance of the inspections. As a result, participants cannot unravel non-disclosure. If we think about the typical disclosure topic between the firm and the investors, large literature starting with Doug Skinner's 1994 paper shows that litigation risk is very important. Surprisingly, at least to me in this setting, when we started working on that, we discovered that litigation risk is actually not an issue in syndicated relationship. First of all, securities law don't apply to syndicated contracts, and they are governed by the contract law. But even under the contract law, there are apparently participation agreements between lead arrangers and participants that pretty much free lead arranger from legal liability of fraud or misrepresentation. In the participation agreement, participants declare or sign a disclaimer that they decided to buy a loan and did their own independent investigation without relying on the information of the lead arranger. And there were a lot of lawsuits that supported this case. And one of the most famous one was Banco Español versus Security Pacific National. And they lost the first court decision and the appeal as well. And it was decided that lead arranger that was hiding information about financial difficulties about the borrower was still not liable in this case. So litigation risk is actually eliminated in this case. What is also interesting about our setting is that disclosure requirements, disclosure regime changes at some point during our sample period. Following the OGI, or Open Government Initiatives, in 2009, FDA followed on this initiative, and they decided to follow. They followed with their own FDA transparency initiative, and part of this initiative was to start publicly disclosing outcomes of FDA inspections to make US government and FDA in particular more transparent. As a result, we have two periods in our sample. We have pre-transparency period, which is prior to the introduction of the OGI, which is from 2000 to 2009. We have post-transparency period, just to highlight its post-implementation of OGI, because it took approximately 2 years for FDA to start disclosing the inspections. And we exclude transitional period because during this period, FDA highlighted and made information about FDA inspections and their importance much more publicly available. As a result, lead arrangers expected they will start disclosing inspection outcomes. Participants could start asking questions about FDA inspections, and we would expect that this is not a clean time period so we take it out to have clean non-disclosure and public disclosure regimes. Our first prediction is that in the pre-transparency period, when lead arranger had an option not to disclose that information, that in case of the negative inspection outcomes, lead arrangers will retain lower loan share, and they will actually transfer the credit risk or the risk to syndicate participants. So imagine that lead arranger discloses information of negative inspections. This indicates that the borrower is riskier, and lead arranger will be required by participants to keep more of the loan. However, if lead arranger hides that information or withholds that information from syndicate participants, they will be unaware, most likely unaware of the information, and lead arranger can keep less of the loan and transfer the risk to them. Probably as expected, we believe that this behavior will change in a post period when information is publicly available. Lead arrangers, of course, will have to retain larger loan share in a post-transparency period relatively to what they held following that inspection in the pre-transparency period. When we go to our sample, typical deal skin composite CRISP information on FDA inspections is from FDA Zilla. This is the private company that FOIA'd a lot of requests for historical FDA information, which allows us to observe, expose FDA inspections and their outcomes under the private regime when they were not publicly disclosed by FDA. This is our primary specifications. We focus on the main characteristics of the lead arranger behavior, which is skin in the game or lead arranger share. Our main variable of interest is bad inspections. This is the outcome when the outcome of the inspection is bad, which is equivalent to form 483. And we also control for inspection, which is the primary, just the existence of inspection. Just to make clear, all firms in our sample had an inspection. We don't have firms that are not subject to FDA and never had an inspection over our sample period. All right, test of our main hypothesis, as you probably saw in the paper, what we find, what we predicted. 20%, the coefficient on bad inspection is negative and significant, and which indicates that relative to clean inspection, bad inspection results in lead arrangers holding significantly smaller proportion of the loan, or approximately 20% less of the loan. What we do next, we try to identify settings in which we can be more sure that lead arranger has access to this information and participants are less informed, because this finding is very nice. It supports our prediction, but we need substantially more stronger analysis to show our point. So what we do next, we focus on a few cross-sectional analysis of partitions where we expect lead arranger to be more aware of this information. So we expect lead arrangers to know about the inspections because they're sophisticated, very sophisticated financial institutions that have experience in monitoring and screening borrowers, but they may not always have access to this information. So we expect them to be more likely to know or to obtain information if these inspections are material. So imagine that the company is in the pharmaceutical industry, and lead arrangers understand that issues with inspections may have bad consequences for future drug development, and they will likely probe for more information about this company. They can do more due diligence, or they can ask borrowers to disclose, or borrowers may more likely to disclose this information when it is likely to be material. So if you look at two proxies for materiality based on FDA standards, these are product lines as, let's say, human drug development, where consequences may be much more material than, for example, if something happens in food production and employees don't wash hands, it's still bad, but it may be not as critical as something that happens with drug development. And another proxy is inspection duration. Longer inspection typically are associated with more complicated consequences. As you see here, we see that bad inspection, coefficients of bad inspection are significantly and economically higher under materiality partitions, which indicate that when inspections are material, they are more likely to be, lead arrangers more likely to know this information and reduce their share of the loan. The next one is very interesting test, and probably my most favorite in the paper, our most favorite on the paper. We look at lead arrangers' own FOIA requests. So lead arrangers can file with FDA to obtain information on past inspections. I would like to highlight is that they are unlikely to get information about specific inspection because of the time lag. But if lead arrangers or this had experience with FOIA FDA requests, we expect them to be more experienced with FDA setting and then understand the importance of these inspections. And this is exactly what we find, that lead arrangers that had a history of FOIA requests, they retain significantly smaller loan share after that inspection. However, syndicate arrangers that never FOIA request to FDA, which are likely to be informed, we don't see any reaction to bad inspection, suggesting that indeed, when they are not aware of the inspection, they don't reduce their lead share. Another interesting partition here is not only lead arrangers can FOIA request, but also participants can. If participants are sophisticated enough, they can also FOIA request. And if they FOIA request in the past, lead arranger loses information advantage and probably cannot hide information. And this is exactly what we find. We find that lead arrangers are able to reduce their skin in the game and transfer risk to syndicate participants only when participants don't FOIA, so they are less informed. Another important partition is, of course, that borrowers may disclose, and Andrea's dissertation is exactly on this topic. Some borrowers disclose voluntarily negative inspection outcomes. And if this is the case, if you look at disclosure partition, this is very interesting because we actually see the reversal in a coefficient on that inspection. So when borrowers disclose and participants know about negative inspection, they require lead arranger to keep higher proportion of the loan. This is exactly what we would expect based on prior theory and empirical literature in syndicated loan market. Borrowers are more risky now following bad inspection, and lead arrangers are required to keep more skin in the game. However, when there's no disclosure, you can see that we keep having the same negative and significant coefficients, which means when there's no public disclosure and participants are uninformed, lead arrangers withhold information and transfer risk to participants. Then when we move to the second hypothesis, we have here now both pre and post period. Sorry, I haven't mentioned all previous tests were of course, in a private disclosure regime when there was no public information. When we combine two periods and see what happens, how lead arranger behavior changes in a post period, we observe reversal, which is generally similar to what we saw on the voluntary disclosure regime. When borrowers disclose, coefficient bad inspection is negative and significant, which is consistent with prior finding in a pre-period. Coefficient on bad inspection post is positive and highly significant, suggesting yes, when information is available and FDA publicly reports information about past FDA inspections, lead arrangers are required to keep significantly higher loan share, higher than in the pre-period and higher than relative to the clean inspection. Just in case you're worried about indigeneity and we have a small sample, I have to admit, we can't do fancy econometrics. We have only less than 100 firms and not many repeated loans to firms. So if you are not convinced about all our partitions, and so immediate correlated variables, if they can explain our result, they should be correlated with all our partitions and should also reverse with public and private disclosure regime. But in case there's still a concern that, let's say, some negative news may trigger both FDA inspection and leader range share, we limit our sample only to observations that had an inspection in prior year, and our results are generally consistent. What else we do? We do robustness test on HHI, which is the concentration of the syndicate holdings. This is an alternative measure that has been used in literature to reflect lead arranger skin in the game. It's not as direct, of course, because it's not directly looking. It's accounting for lead arranger skin in the game, but it's not direct. But all our results are very similar for the main analysis and across all the partitions. Because I'm running out of time, just very quickly on the last set of analysis we have. We also look at reputational damages. As you can imagine, when information is public, participants can start asking, okay, have I been informed about this inspection previously when I was working with the lead arranger and FDA was not disclosing information? And we expect that in case that participants discover prior misbehavior by the lead arranger, they may be punishing lead arranger, and reputation damages are expensive in this market because this is the market of repeating games. Participants came back and work with the same lead arrangers. In this case, we expect that lead arranger that misbehaved in a prior period, they will be asked by participants to hold larger loan share in a post period when information is publicly available to indicate their stronger commitment to screen and monitor the borrower, and in this way at least partially compensate for the loss of reputation. And yes, we find positive and significant coefficient on misbehavior, which indicates greater loan share that lead arrangers have to retain in a post period if they misled participants in a prior period. We also look at how this effect changes with reputation. It's not clear because high reputation may actually have mitigating and accelerating effect on this relationship based on prior literature. What we do find is lead arrangers that have high reputation in this market is actually the one that are punished, probably because participants expect them to be more trustworthy and experienced. And if they were hiding information in the pre-period, they pay higher price. Just the supplementary analysis, we look at the loan terms. It's not the primary interest of our paper, but we also look what happened to the loan terms. If participants are concerned in the post period about bad FDA inspection outcomes, they may not only require lead arranger to keep higher loan share, they may also expect lead arranger to impose more restrictive loan terms, especially terms related to the monitoring. This is what we expect. The coefficient, we have marginally significantly higher number of covenants, higher performance pricing, increasing provisions, which indicates interest rates may increase in borrower underperforms in the future. We don't find much effect on the bad inspection for the spread, but we do see that spread goes down when positive or clean inspection outcomes are reported. It's untabulated, but we did similar analysis in a pre-transparency period, and consistent with our expectations, we don't find any results. So lead arranger hides that information and doesn't reflect it in any contractual terms. So to conclude, we find evidence that lead arrangers retain low loan share following bad news or bad inspection outcomes in this specific setting that allows us to proxy for private information by the lead arranger. The effect is stronger exactly where expected to be stronger when lead arrangers submit for a request or when inspections are more material, and then lead arrangers are less likely to be informed. And the effect is significantly mitigated by borrower's voluntary disclosure and in a post-transparency period, and actually this effect is reversed, and lead arrangers are forced to keep larger loan share after bad inspections. So what we infer is that the arrangers withhold information and thus transfer risk to participants, and we highlight the importance of voluntary and mandatory disclosure in the ability of lead arrangers to exploit its information advantage. Some caveats, of course, our sample is very small because we are limited to FDA-regulated firms and some other data limitations. And the small sample is, of course, has effect on generalizability of our results. Additional issue with how generalizable our results are is that we are talking about some very specific firms regulated by FDA, and they are not, may not be similar to the universe that is typically studied in lending and disclosure literature. So again, our findings of misbehavior or bad lead arranger behavior may not generalize outside of the FDA inspection study. And very quickly, in terms of our contribution, we believe, at least we strongly believe, we contributed to literatures. One is debt contracting. So prior studies focused primarily on formal contractual incentives, which is the lead arranger share. However, there's little evidence on contractual incentives if this lead arranger share aligns incentives of lead arrangers and participants. There are only 2 prior papers that touch on this topic, Gapolan and Linen Parvasini. They look at lead arrangers' negligence in performing monitoring duties. So they look what happens with lead arrangers missed the accounting fraud or didn't act in a timely manner to prevent borrower bankruptcy following loan issuance. What we do here, we look at the pre-loan issuance period, at the due diligence done by the lead arranger, and we are looking more at the opportunistic behavior of the lead arranger when lead arrangers intentionally mislead the borrowers. In terms of disclosure literature, of course, most of disclosure literature focuses on voluntary disclosure and how it resolves information asymmetry between investors and companies. Recent studies started looking more at the disclosure in a loan setting, including how lenders' health or monitoring affects disclosure. We make one more step forward and we say, okay, disclosure not only affects relationship between borrowers and lenders, but disclosure also affects the relationship between very sophisticated lenders in this market. And we show that mandatory disclosure and voluntary disclosure actually can significantly reduce lead arranger information advantage and their ability to opportunistically withhold information from participants. And this is highlights how like regulatory disclosure or mandatory disclosure can help even sophisticated investors in this market. And I think I'm done right now, and thanks so much. And I'm looking forward for your questions. I didn't mention before, this is a brand new paper. As I said, we just incentive were very good, high to manage to finish it before Miami. The paper is, I would say, 2 weeks old, so we greatly appreciate all the comments and we'll be happy to extend it in the next few weeks.
All right, thank you. Actually, Regina, did you want to keep sharing your screen? Just
okay,
in case people have, they might have questions
sure.
on specific slides, so we usually have the speakers.
Sure, apologize, let me share.
Just keep sharing, and
yeah.
then we'll go to the first question, which I think is Jen. Go for it.
Aloha, Regina.
Hey.
I enjoyed your talk. I also want to echo your comments about Miami. Miami is really at the vanguard of everything. Yeah. So I have one question. Why do the participant lender allow being taken advantage of? If, let's say, if the participant lender is taken advantage, are they less likely to join the loan syndication next time?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and we hope to do more on that in the paper. You're absolutely right. So I would say there are 2 responses that I can give you. First of all, in the pre-period, they don't know they're taking advantage of, right? They don't have information on FDA inspections. They care if, and many of them are, they don't know, they are not sure they happen, right? So this is our unraveling equilibrium. They don't know. So they join syndicate and they may not know. In the post period, as we show, this is exactly related to your question, they may not join syndicate in the future if they feel they were misled in the pre-period, or they join but they request lead arranger to keep higher loan share. So we show the higher loan share. We can also, and it's on our to-do list, to see if participants just don't work with this lead arranger when they understand they were misled. But our big assumption that in a pre-period they don't know they're misled by syndicate participants.
I also have a question about some of the inspection results. You mentioned the catch-up example. I kind of like your kids. I also like catch-up. I think after the catch-up example, maybe I'll use less catch-up. But from the lender and from the shareholder's point of view, it's better for the firm to keep it quiet and get fixed, the problem fixed. Because if I know the catch-up maker kind of pollute my catch-up, I'm going to less likely to buy. So from the lender and the shareholder's point of view, they prefer the manufacturer not to disclose and fix the problem as soon as possible, so that they can maintain the reputation in the market.
No, I agree. And this is, I would say, basis of our analysis, that lead arranger doesn't want to disclose because it may affect, as you said, we'll start buying less of this product that may affect future profitability. So I would say I agree with that, and this is the basis of our presumption that it's better not to disclose. However, under public disclosure regime, they don't have an option. It's disclosed by FDA and they have to react.
So is it kind of like a negotiation with the FDA? For example,
no, I apologize for interrupting. You can negotiate. It's not your auditor that you can convince not to give you that report. They are not paid by the firm. They are not affected by the firm. They're scientists employed by the government. And no, if they issue bad inspection, you have a choice not to disclose it in the pre-period, but in the post-period, it's public information. There's absolutely nothing you can do.
And also maybe firms can build the relationship with the inspector. It's kind of like a regulator captured by the regulatee or something like that.
Maybe Andrea would like to add here, but this is an assumption that the same inspector comes every time, which I think is very unlikely. That the same inspector will come back to you in 2 or 3 years when your next inspection. But again, they're not paid by you, and it's not a Federal Reserve. They're not afraid that you fail, right? They're not too big to fail for them. And they are worried about our public health, right? So hopefully whatever you presume will never happen, right?
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Next we have Doug Hanna.
Hello, thank you for presenting, Regina. I'd like to understand better a little more about how the lead arranger's percentage of holding is determined. Your paper sort of motivates it as if the lead arranger chooses this and might use it for strategic purposes. But in more than one place in your presentation, you also mentioned the participants require the lead arranger to hold a certain amount. So this seems like a negotiation. It seems like the participants are aware of the lead arranger's holdings, and this is a repeated game. So if I'm used to seeing the lead arranger hold 20% of a loan and all of a sudden they're holding 15, it challenges my understanding of your conclusion that they're unable to unwind some of this.
It's a good point. I don't think the lead arrangers always hold 20%, right? If that would be the case, yes, but it varies.
It might be helpful to know how much variation there is in that holding percentage.
It's a good idea. We can add how much variation there is in a big sample and a big syndicated loan sample to give it more flavor but there is a substantial variation in lead arranger share. It also depends a lot on the conditions in the market and how much lead arranger can sell. So generally, lead arrangers prefer to keep as less as possible, at least the smallest amount possible. Because generally, and I think it was a little bit in the paper, maybe in the footnote, but we haven't highlighted enough, lead arrangers don't make most of their money from interest spread on this lead arranger share. They make most of their money on origination fees that they charge, which are very significant, may go up to 150, 200 basis points of the loan share. And lead arrangers also make money on cross-selling. So whenever they deal with the borrower on the lending side, they can underwrite future bonds and equity and become an M&A advisors. So they generally prefer to keep as last as possible and sell and syndicate as much as possible out. But it also depends on the conditions in the market, how many participants are interested. Right? So if more participants are interested, the arranger will be able to keep less of the loan. But participants also keep in mind that they should keep lead arranger skin in the game, otherwise he is not committed to screen and monitor. So it's a complicated equilibrium, I would say, but there's definitely a variation. But we can add that to the paper. I don't think that participants can say, hey, this lead arranger typically holds 20, now it holds 15, something's going on. I doubt it's possible, but we can create much more descriptive stats on that.
Your answer suggested that there might be a multi-variable model that describes what this percentage is, and maybe looking at deviations from that would be helpful. I'm not sure. Thank you.
We have multivariate model. We control for a lot of characteristics, but we can do more on that in that respect for sure.
All right, thanks. Next we have Wi-Fi.
Yifei.
Sorry.
Hi, Regina. Thanks for the presentation. I enjoy reading your paper. So I have a question about a little bit concerned about the selection issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems that the conclusion of your paper is that lead arrangers withhold bad news about bad inspections, but it's possible that some lead arrangers do share bad information to syndicate members. And because of that, the syndicate members choose not to join because the risk is too high. In that case, the syndicate is not formed. And I believe these part of syndicates are not observed in your sample because the syndicates are not formed. So in that case, maybe there is like selection issues. And on the other hand, like if participant, as Doc has mentioned, participant members may infer that there is bad news when they find that the lead arranger is reluctant to hold shares. So I'm thinking about that if the syndicates formed regardless of low lead arranger holdings, the borrowers of these syndicates may be more healthy and like more transparent unconditionally. So this brings another layer of selection issue, like maybe these syndicates may have lower lead arranger shares unconditionally instead of what you're saying is the lead arranger hold the bad news, which caused the lead arranger shares to be low. So what is your take on this?
I would say you have a lot of questions. I hope I was able to catch most of them, but I'll try to address whatever I was able to catch up. So first of all, yes, it's possible. I would say generally, I doubt that inspection will cause non-existence of a syndicate. Because if the borrower needs money and needs funding, they will be able eventually to find lead arranger that will agree to fund them. They will just have to pay a higher price, or lead arranger will have to work really hard to find syndicate participants that agree. So I doubt that it's a serious event, but I doubt this event is completely will limit the access to credit to the borrower. I don't think it's as serious as not letting borrower to get access to the syndicated loan market. And of course, our sample, we can observe firms that don't get credit, but I would say the probability of that is pretty low. Also, it may be, as you said, that the better borrowers eventually get access to the market, but in this case, I would actually expect the opposite. So if it shouldn't vary with public versus private disclosure, we shouldn't observe any relation with FOIA requests. So you have to remember that even if there was one, let's say there's some primary and middle correlated variable that you are suspicious about, let's say some borrower health characteristics that we don't capture, this characteristic should be correlated with all our public disclosure variable. So our access to private information variables should be negatively or correlated in the opposite direction with participants' access to information. And on the top of that, it should completely reverse in the post period. And not only that this variable should reverse, the reversal should coincide with FDA disclosure requirements. So there are too many conditions, I would say, that this potential immediate correlated variable should satisfy. But in terms of more economic approach to your question, I doubt this issue is severe enough to credit ration the companies out of the market.
Yeah, I see. So to our first point, is it possible that one borrower goes to like several lead arrangers before the borrower eventually gets a loan? I believe
it's possible that they shop. Yeah, everybody is shopping, right?
Yeah. So I think the first 3 unsuccessful shopping trips should also provide some information, maybe like these lead arrangers kind of share the bad news, and for that reason the syndicate is not formed. So I think it's just like a semantic issue, like because from your paper it seems that lead arrangers are reluctant to share, but it could be that they share, and for that reason the syndicate is not formed.
You know, I don't think so. They because there are also some steps, institutional steps in the syndicate structure. So first of all, lead arranger works was the borrower for let's say 3 months to form the syndicate, to form the contract and do the due diligence. So it's not that I knock on the lead arranger's door and say I want a loan, and lead arranger talks to participants immediately. First of all, lead arranger does the due diligence, works on a loan contract, and loan contracts are almost ready. It starts marketing the contract to participants, and eventually it maybe find participants that are more expensive or less likely to join. If banks are not able to join, they will go to institutional participants, but eventually syndicate will be formed in some form or another form. But if you have any information how many lead arrangers they shopped with, I would happy to use it. But this is private information we probably will never able to get.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your answer.
Okay. So I actually think the next one was me. So I just had a quick clarification question, but I think you kind of answered it with some of the additional analysis, which was, I guess, is the assumption that the lead arranger will always have the information on the form 483s in the paper, or was that sort of what that FOIA request was sort of getting at, where you do that cut at the end?
Yeah, I think we maybe can be more clear. We presume on average that lead arranger will uncover this information. It's possible that it may not always be the case. So to highlight it, exactly as you said, we go and look at FOIA requests, because to us is the strongest indication that lead arranger had information, because it has an experience with filing FOIA requests. They understand the importance and the potential consequences of FDA inspection. But on average, our results support our average assumption, because otherwise there's no reason for lead arranger to keep less share after that inspection if they are not aware of it. But of course, some of our partitions are insignificant. Let's say when in the partition where lead arrangers don't FOIA, there's no result, which is consistent with them being less informed and potentially not being aware of FDA inspections and keeping the same lead share as before.
Thanks. And actually, I did have another quick question, so I'll ask it now while I have the floor. It was more, and you know, you can defer this or we can talk offline, but it was more just, what are you sort of alluded to it in some of your other answers, but I was wondering, what are the other trade-offs in terms of a lead arranger choosing how much they keep? So for instance, is that really the only mechanism they have to signify sort of quality in these loans? Can they play around with the fee allocations to the other participants? Like, I'm wondering sort of who has the bargaining power in the relationship. Is there always a bunch of participant lenders that want to get in on these syndicates, such that the lead arranger can sort of set the terms here?
Yeah,
or is it?
Go ahead, sorry.
Because this will, yeah, sorry, but because that will kind of impact whether or not, like, what the portion the lead arranger keeps, or how that's, what that means and what that captures, right? Depending on who has bargaining power between the syndicate members and things like that. So just wondering if they sort of tweak anything else as part of this.
To me, it's usually just based on the prior literature, lead arranger has more bargaining power because these deals are pretty lucrative. And even if I would say some of the lead arrangers, some of the participants may not feel that they were compensated sufficiently, like exposed because they didn't know about that inspections. Many of them can potentially still join the syndicate because it's a very lucrative deal. They're typically, not in the times of COVID or financial crisis, but typically there's higher demand for these deals than the number of syndicates that lead arrangers can take. In terms of the fee, it mostly goes for lead arranger because for the organizing the deal, it can give split some of the fees with participants in terms of maybe syndicated agent gets some for just processing the documentation, but most of it goes to the lead arranger. And maybe, unfortunately, there's no way for us, many times we don't know even the fee, but there's no, I don't know any documentation that tells us who gets what. But I would say generally it's lead arranger's fee.
All right. It was just feeding into the fact that if they're sort of shifting the risk through the keeping less, I just wondered if there was another dial being turned that was sort of keeping the other participants
happy,
indifferent, or just as happy. Yeah. All right. So then there wasn't this reputational hit that you would expect, right? If this is a repeated game.
Mm-hmm. You know, I don't think they will share with them the fees because fees allocated according to the role they do. It's not just, okay, I'll take the fee and then give you extra. We don't, related to what you said, potentially they could say, okay, I keep last, but I impose very significant terms or very tight terms on a syndicate so that you see that it's highly monitored, right? They have a lot of covenants and performance pricing provisions, but actually we don't see anything in the pre-period, which is consistent with them not changing anything else or not compensating their participants. So we should highlight probably these results more in the paper that we don't see anything else.
Awesome, thanks. All right, and the next one we have Sikri.
Hi, Professor. I really enjoyed your presentation and I love your paper very much. I'm pretty interested in it. I have a quick question because this paper assumes that FDA inspection results are private information which participant lenders have not access to for periods of time. Are there any other channels that participant lenders could know about the company's violations? And do they fully depend on the information offered by the lead arrangers? And usually on the contracts, is there any regulation stating that the lead arrangers need to let participant lenders know the lead allocation decrease and notify them why they do this? I mean, about the change of the allocation. That's my question. Thank you.
I would say there are two questions. Actually, we'll start with the second one because no, there's no requirement. And lead arranger, it's not a change, right? You mean the change probably relative to prior behavior. As I said, Dab was asking, no, there's a large variation in lead arranger share. And lead arrangers don't tell, okay, I keep here less than I kept before. It's actually observable information. Partially, participants can find it. But lead arrangers don't even have to, as I mentioned in terms of legal environment in the setting, lead arrangers don't have to disclose to participants any private information. So participants can access information independently of the lead arranger. And unfortunately, I don't remember all the co-authors, but Ed Owens and his co-authors have a recent, very interesting paper where they look at what participants do when they join syndicates, and they do find that participants verify at least some of the public information. So they look at Edgar filings, and I see that participants do look at financial statements and some other public disclosures before they join the syndicate. So they do some verification of what lead arranger is providing them of, but there's very hard for them to get access to private information. So especially in the pre-transparency regime, they won't be able to get information on a specific inspection in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks. Next we have Dina.
Hi, Regina, how are you?
Good, thanks.
It's great work. I'm very happy to meet you today at the Miami seminar. You partially communicated with Emmanuel about my question. So my question is about the pre-loan arrangement. It's fair to assume that the lead arranger will impose high cost of borrowing for such a risky loan. So wouldn't there be like trade-off between the benefit from not syndicating those kind of lucrative loan versus syndicating them?
I'm not sure I fully got your question, but in it, we find no change in the contractual terms, which is in the pre-period, which in our view consistent with lead arrangers not revealing this information. And I'm not sure if this is what you were asking about.
Yeah, I like briefly mentioned something like that in descriptive stat, but I wasn't quite sure that you have looked into the cost of borrowing just loan terms.
Yeah, we did. So we don't find in the pre-period effect on any contractual terms. In the post-period, we still don't find effect on cost of borrowing, but we find the effect on more other contractual terms. So the contract is tighter. These borrowers, after bad inspections, they should have, they have high number of covenants and more restrictive performance pricing provisions. So we do see that they are more restrictive, but we didn't find results for the spread.
Okay, yeah, and my follow-up question was about controlling for endogeneity and the omitted correlated variable. I was recommending doing propensity score matching sample. I understand you want to look at pre and post same firm, but maybe a matching sample of firm.
I wish we could do it. We have only 70 firms, so and there's nothing left if we match them, right? So this is as good as we. As I said, this is one of the limitations of this paper. I would like personally, we feel it's a really cool setting is access to private information, but downside is, yeah, we cannot do fancy econometrics because, especially in the pre-period where most of our action is, we have 80 something firms and there's nothing left, unfortunately, after propensity score matching.
Okay.
But we'll keep thinking about some other econometrics approaches they can do. This doesn't work, unfortunately.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Thanks. And mindful of the time, so we might have one last question from Shulan.
Yes. Hi, Regina. Yeah. I really liked your paper and I understand your story. Just by looking at your results, I've been thinking, since the communication among lenders is not really observable, for your results, we can also interpret it as the lead lender share the bad information and the other participants, or they look for the participants are more willing to share the risk. So the results will be the same, but in this alternative story, they're like more, less cynical. And since you have results saying if they hide the information, there's gonna be some consequences, damage to their reputation. What do you think about this more collaborative environment, like the alternative explanation to the results?
Let me make sure I understand. So your story would be that lead arrangers did share information and just say, okay, I share with you negative information, go and join me anyway, but have in mind, I will keep lots of the share.
Yeah, this is the material bad information, and I would like the participants share the risk with me, or look for the participants are more willing to share the risk with me. Let's get a deal.
It's possible. Yeah, in theory, I would say this is a possibility. But I would say generally it's against the all-defining syndicated loan literature that shows when participants do know about the risk of the borrower, they require a lead arranger to keep more. But I would say specifically to our setting, that won't work with this idea, even it's plausible, won't work with any of our partitions, because all our partitions show that when lead arranger are especially, let's say, start with participants partition, we show that when participants are more likely to be aware, it's actually the opposite. They require lead arranger to keep more of the loan. So if you look at when participants FOIA, so they're more informed, they're more likely to be informed. We don't find this result. And especially in a voluntary disclosure and public disclosure regime, the relation fully reverses. So when we know that participants are aware because borrowers voluntarily disclosed, or because FDA disclosed that information, they react exactly as syndicated loan market literature predicts. They ask lead arrangers to keep more of the loan. So it goes in opposite direction, which tells me even this idea is plausible, it's not what happens in reality.
Right.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Great, thank you. All right, so we've gone a few minutes over, but first I'd like to thank Regina and obviously thank all you guys for participating. It was
and
great.
I would like to thank my co-authors who were as well here today.
Excellent. I would say if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Regina or any of the co-authors directly. I'm sure they'd be happy to hear from you. And that's pretty much it from us. We have Florida next week, and everyone have a great weekend. And again, thank you, Regina.
Yeah, thanks again for Emmanuel and Roman and everybody else in Miami for doing such a wonderful job with everything.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye, guys.
Bye.